Patrik and Polk, welcome to AAFCA Presents Pride 2020. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. So, we have been celebrating all things LGBTQ all month long, all throughout June. And we're so super excited to be chatting with you about your amazing career as a filmmaker, as a content creator, and as a trailblazer. I know that this week you had some really big news to come out about your series, Noah's Ark, and really excited about that.
Yeah, we announced just yesterday. So yeah, we're very excited to be getting the band back together.
Absolutely. So 2020, kind of started off a little rocky. Miss Rona kind of came in and messed things up a little bit. But this is a very special year for you. It's the anniversary year for you, the 20th anniversary of your groundbreaking film, Punks. And, that really was how we were introduced to your artistry and to who you are as this great content creator. But before we even go into that, Patrik, I kind of want to go all the way back, like all the way back to the young man that was growing up in Hattiesburg, Mississippi? And when did you discover that you wanted to be this amazing storyteller?
I think I always was into creative writing as a child, and at a certain point, though, I probably this would have been like early junior high, like seventh grade. As a small child, and so I remember writing like a soap in like spiral notebooks, and but I would use the names of my friends as the characters, and it was very much it was very over the top and kind of like dramatic and very much in the vein of Dynasty or Dallas or the soap operas or whatever. Um, and I remember us videotaping. A friend had a video camera, and I remember us videotaping, an episode. Um, so at a certain point, I was, trying to do things, I guess, and then sometimes, as crude as they kind of were, and then sometime after that, Spike Lee emerged on the scene, and I sort of that kind of cemented the idea. Okay, filmmaking, that's what this is, and a director, that's what this is called, and film school, that's where you go to do it. That's what Spike Lee did, because he was the first Black person that I knew. So yeah, and then from that point on, like junior high, it became like, okay, this is what the plan is. This is what I will do. So I just knew, okay, I'm going to film school. So that became the goal, and then that's what I did.
You eventually graduated from USC and landed a job at MTV. You also got an opportunity to work with Kenneth Babyface Edmonds and his wife Tracy Edmonds. And if I recall from an interview that I was watching as I was doing research about you, that they actually helped fund the first film, Punks. And so, what were some of the lessons that you learned working with them? Because they really were a part of creating images for African Americans, I'd say probably around the late 90s, early 2000s. So, what did you learn as an aspiring filmmaker while working with them?
I came out of film school and I kind of fell into this role as a production executive at MTV, and then with Babyface and Tracy. And I think the thing that was amazing about them is that they were Hollywood royalty. He could not have been more mainstream at the time. He was, he hadn't even really peaked. He was still peaking. But he was so massive. And they were just these really down to earth, smart, fun people that really had these ambitious. Um, so it just kind of continued my educational experience, what I call like sort of learning how movies get made from inside the Hollywood system, starting at MTV and Paramount, and then continuing with Edmonds and at 20th Century Fox. Um, it was just really cool to see Black creatives sort of controlling this whole situation, wielding their power, telling Black stories, soul food and all of that. I mean, it was just really cool. And then they were just cool people. So they were just fun. They liked to travel, and then they would take us with them. And they were just active. You know, a lot of times you'll talk to people who work with celebrity production company figureheads or whatever. You know, they're not very active in the companies. They're kind of in name only, and then they have people that run it for them. But they lived and breathed it. It was really Tracy's vision. She had the vision to go into film and television. She was a genuine producer. And so it was just great to be with people that were that ambitious and that hardworking and that successful. And then to have them believe in me enough to finance Punks, because they didn't help pay for it. They paid for it. They wrote a check. You know, this groundbreaking gay movie, nothing like it had ever been done. So, and like I said, he could not have been more sort of mainstream Black America. So it was a risk. It was a risky move when you really think about it, but they didn't flinch. They loved the idea. Then to my shock, they loved the script. When I first gave them the script, they were going away for a vacation with their family, I think to Greece or something. And they came back, and I just knew they were going to say no after reading it and seeing, okay, it really is a gay script. But they came back and they were like, you know, the script had been passed through the entire family. Like the brother had read it, the mother, the uncle, and everyone really loved it. They thought it was so funny, and they were in. Yeah, so it was a great experience. Tracy and I are still close to this day. I'm writing a TV movie for Lifetime right now that she's producing. Yeah, that was wonderful.
Wow. And so, if you will, can you take us back to, I guess, when you were thinking about Punks and what inspired those characters? Because when I saw the film, that for me was the first time that I really got to see all levels or all representations of the LGBTQ community. Each character sort of represented a certain person.
And this was early in my MTV days, so I was just out of film school. I had written the script for a movie that I would end up doing like 20 years later, Blackbird. I'd written that script, you know, sort of coming out of film school. And it had gotten a lot of positive notice, responses, but, you know, it was this Black gay movie. Nobody was going to make it. Back then, this was like in the early 90s. And I was thinking about what I wanted to do, what I wanted to write as I was working at MTV, developing movies like Beavis and Butthead and Election, and a filmmaker that I met at the time who had written a movie called Stonewall, not the Stonewall that came out more recently. That one was pretty much trash, but the original Stonewall from the 90s is amazing. People, you should go find that movie and watch it. But this Black gay British screenwriter had written that movie, and so we had met, and I had a very fast affinity towards him, and we became friends. And he became a bit of a mentor, older brother type, you know, because he was this sort of very fabulous, flamboyant, Black British, openly gay and loud about it, you know, amazing artist. And so he said something to me. I was like, I'm trying to figure out what to write next. You know, Blackbird has gotten some good notices, but, you know, no one really wants to make this movie. And he said the words to me that have stayed throughout my career, which he said very simply, write the story that only you can tell. And that kind of solidified it for me. You know, it was like, okay, well, story that I can tell. I think Waiting to Exhale had happened and was a big hit around that time. And I thought, I want to see a movie like that about gay people. And I had a roommate at the time, not roommate, but my best friend at the time was this young, beautiful, like gorgeous, dark-skinned, muscular Black man in West Hollywood, who was, while we were friends, was diagnosed as HIV positive. And so I kind of witnessed him go from like suddenly getting sick once and then being in the hospital, not knowing what's wrong, to kind of wondering if he had it, and then telling me how like the nurse, no one came and told him he had tested positive, and he asked the nurse, did they ever get the results back? And she kind of very matter-of-factly rattled off like, oh yeah, they didn't tell you, yeah, you're positive or whatever, like it was nothing, you know. But I watched him sort of get diagnosed, deal with it, you know, all the, back then it was like, it wasn't 1 pill a day, it was like 10 pills a day, and half of them made you ill, and these made you not be able to sleep, and this did this. So I watched him kind of struggle with all of that, managing it, figuring it out, while maintaining, you know, this gorgeous cover boy, muscly body, continuing to live and love and constantly picking up men and just doing it, you know, like a young 20-something Black gay man would. And I wanted to tell that story. Because at the time, all we had seen, I mean, we were just kind of coming out of the really horrible period of the AIDS epidemic. And so it was becoming less of a death sentence by that point. But there was still a lot of fear and stigma, and everything that we saw represented was, you know, an early Frost, if you remember that movie. It was all about dying and death, and that's all you saw about AIDS. And that was not the experience that I witnessed with my friends. So I'm like, this is a story. This story needs to be told. He's a regular person who just happens to have HIV, and he is living and loving like, you know, everybody else. So it was kind of like, it was sort of like this idea that, okay, there's never been anything like this. So how do I tell, you know, multiple stories in one go?
We've got some really good news about Noah's Ark, and that you released this week about this reunion special that is going to be taking place next month. So can we talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. You know, I mean, there's never, like, the fans have never stopped sort of wanting more of that show. So we hear from them all the time, literally all the time. And what people don't know is I've been busy behind the scenes for years trying to get a reboot mounted, you know, in the Viacom universe. And it's been a roller coaster. And I was working more recently with white gay producers, who, one of whom used to be like the president of MTV. So I thought, well, they can help. We can make this happen, because they actually reached out to me and said, have you thought about it? And I'm like, yeah, I'd love to do it. So, you know, for a few years we were trying and going through these different iterations and meetings and different sort of versions of the project, only to sort of finally hit a sort of cement wall about a year ago or whatever. So, and you know, I've been busy working. Did Being Mary Jane. I did. I wrote the finale, which aired last year. P-Valley, I'm a co-exec producer on, which premieres next month on Stars. Make sure you watch that. That has some amazing Black LGBTQ characters that you will not want to miss. I think it was one of those gay white producers, it was Dave Mace, who was formerly a high-level executive at Logo. So he had worked there on the Noah's Ark stuff, you know, so he was very passionate about the show. He called me up and said, hey, I just want to put a bug in your ear. I don't know if you've seen, like, a lot of shows have been doing, like, while we all been shut down, have been doing, you know, reunions and kind of getting cast together. And, you know, I think maybe, I don't know if you thought about doing something like that with Noah, but, you know, just an idea. And so I started thinking about it, and then I was like, well, if we're going to do it, let's do it. Let's just do an original episode. Then I saw, like, Parks and Recreation did, like, an original episode set during COVID. And I thought, oh, let's do that. Let's just go for it. And because I've been developing reboots, already had some ideas of where the characters were. So it was just a case of, okay, let's put this together. And then the Black Lives Matter protest kicked up again. And so that kind of changed things a little bit, because I was writing it set during the COVID shutdown. And then there's this extra angle to add. So now we also address that. So yeah, so that's kind of how it came about, really. It's a love letter to the fans. It's to let people know kind of where the characters are 10 years later. But it's also, you know, it's also sort of for the powers that be to see, like, this is what this show is, and this is why it was ahead of its time 15 years ago, and was, you know, cut off, canceled way too soon. But since we're having all these conversations about Black Lives Matter and Black LGBTQ Lives Matter and all this stuff, and while you're all out there rebooting Will and Grace and Queer as Folk and L Word and everything else, hey, what about Noah's Ark? So the hope is that also, because I think we'll have a large viewership, that people will, you know, the powers that be will hear, and maybe we can actually get an official reboot going. So, but it's gonna be amazing. I also have to say there'll be a lot of big surprises that people will want to see. There will be some amazing guest appearances and stuff. You will not want to miss it, for sure.
We're definitely looking forward to seeing that. I want to go back to a project that I kind of call that your first love, and that is Blackbird. The film came out a couple of years back, starring Monique and Isaiah Washington and a very young, impressionable Julian Walker, I believe is his last name. And just wanted to talk about that film because I think that film represented the experiences of so many people that were coming to terms with their sexuality, the things that they experience when trying to find themselves. The inspiration behind that, I believe that was based off of a book that you had read in college.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I went to college in Boston, and you know, I knew I was gay from a young age, and in Mississippi, I knew this is not something that, you know, I can sort of trumpet and run around screaming at the top of my lungs. But I also, at a certain point, I knew that I will escape this state. I knew I will leave Mississippi when I finished high school, I'm out. And ended up, you know, getting accepted to colleges all over the country, Ivy League and not, and settling on Brandeis University because I got a full scholarship, and you know, I did not come from money, so that was, and it was a good school, so I was like, okay, free ride, I'm there. And I remember getting on the plane in Jackson, Mississippi to fly up to Boston, and as the plane took off and I looked out, you know, and saying goodbye to Mississippi, I said to myself, when I step off this plane, every person that I meet from this day forward will know that I am gay. I don't know where that came from. I don't know why it came, but that's what I thought as I looked out that plane window and I flew to Boston. And I remember, because Brandeis is sort of just outside the city, 20-minute train ride. And we go into get on the train and go into Boston to shop and whatnot. And I remember going into Harvard Square, going to the Co-op, the big bookstore, and just walking around and then being stunned. I remember asking if they had any sort of books by gay authors. And there was one shelf, you know, it was wider than that. So one shelf that was gay and lesbian. And I remember looking at the shelf, and there was one book that I could see had black skin on the spine. So the illustration had black skin. And I pull it out, and it was Blackbird by Larry Duplichan. And I buy it. I'm sitting on the train. I'm devouring it. I think I finished it probably that night. It's this amazing, lovely coming of age story set in the 70s in like a small town in California. This Black boy, very religious, devout religious Christian, you know, choir boy, really believes and really struggling with his sexuality. And his friends are also all kind of cracking under the weight of the pressure of this sort of small conservative California town. And so I fell in love with the story and I thought this is a story I would love to see. And I was also teaching myself screenwriting at the time. So I thought, oh, I'll write this as a script. And so that was the first script I wrote, was my adaptation of Blackbird, which I wrote in college. And so I set it, though, in Mississippi. And I set it present day because I just thought, you know, Mississippi today, this story would still be relevant and back in the 90s. And just made it a little more, you know, I sort of veered it a little more in the direction of that setting. But the heart of the story is all Larry Duplichan. And he wrote it's a series of books that follow that character through adulthood. So if there's anybody that's interested in looking for something good to read, go back and get the Larry Duplichan books. He's got about 8 or 9 of them, and they're all amazing. So yeah, it was just this sort of, it was such an important moment for me as a young gay man to suddenly, that was the first time that I experienced, you know, knowingly, a work of art by a Black gay man, if you know what I mean. That was really the first time. Yeah, it was really important. And I felt a kinship with Randy in the book, Randall in the book, Randy in the movie. But again, no one was going to make that movie. It was never going to happen. So that sat on a shelf while I did all this other stuff, years and years and years. And then after I'd made The Skinny, which was another independent film that I did before Blackbird. And so I had done The Skinny and finished that. And then I was trying to figure out what's next. And a producer I had worked with hit me up and said, hey, I've got this guy, he's coming out of the music industry and he's got money and he's looking for a film project. He's gay white guy. Do you have anything that you think he might find interesting? And I thought about it and I was like, well, there's always Blackbird. Gave her Blackbird and the producer responded to it. It was like, he loves it. He wants to do it. So suddenly we had the budget. We had someone writing a check. And so next thing you know, I'm off to Mississippi to my hometown to make this movie, which was a really amazing experience because it was like, I mean, I'm a hometown boy. So first of all, it was just great because I know everybody. So the mayor at the time I knew. I went to high school with his daughter. You know, the chief of police and the sheriff. My cousin is a judge in our hometown now. Like, you know, so it's just like anything I wanted to do, I could shoot anywhere. I shot at the high school. I shot at a beautiful theater in downtown. I shot, you know. But it was amazing to see my hometown community kind of embrace this film project and like offered it and offered me all kinds of help and assistance. And it was just really, it was an amazing experience being able to create that film in my hometown with, you know, 2 of my favorite actors, Monique and Isaiah Washington. And then just to discover this young Black Mississippi gay boy at University of Southern Mississippi, never acted before, you know, always kind of inside kind of wanted to do it, but never really had an opportunity, never really had anybody say, hey, you know, so the whole kind of collective experience was really amazing to sort of finally see that vision come to life 20 years later or whatever it was. And I'm very proud of that film. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I want to ask, you know, you've been at this for a very long time. You have worn numerous hats as writer, director, producer, as you just mentioned, executive producer on Being Mary Jane, as well as P-Valley, which is coming out, like you said, next month. What lessons have you learned? What is the biggest lesson that you've learned from this journey that maybe you can share with our audience that could inspire, you know, the next generation of LGBTQ content creators?
Well, I would pass along the same information that, you know, Ricky Beetle Blair gave to me when I was in my early 20s, which was write the story that only you can tell. You know, write the story that only you can tell, because that's the story that you know the best. That doesn't mean write your story. Don't, that doesn't mean literally write your story. Not everybody's story is interesting. I don't know that my story would be all that interesting in a movie, but certainly elements of my story I can borrow from, and I have, but write what you know. That is, I think, the main thing. And the other thing I would say, like if I could tell my younger self anything as an artist, it would probably be, one, I would say write more, just write a hell of a lot more. And two, just to overcome the fear a lot as early as you can, as soon as you can. Because the fear does kind of slow you down, it slows you down.
Well, Patrik and Polk, thank you so very much for sharing some very personal stories, for sharing your journey with us. Again, this is all part of AAFCA Presents Pride 2020, and we've just been celebrating stories within the community that have inspired us, and yours definitely has inspired us. The stories that you've written yourself have also inspired us. The characters, the plots, the drama of it all has all inspired us, and we thank you so very much for your contribution to our story as Black gay people in this country. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. This is actually a really nice interview.